Hey, this is Seth Parnell, the minister at the Portia Church of Christ, and this is episode 185 of the Midweek Bible Study. Hope that you are doing well. Hope things are going your way. Appreciate you being here with us tonight. As it's a little bit chilly, a little bit windy out there, but I think that it was pretty good once it got warmed up. And so, if you were able to get out today, hope you enjoy the day. And it's one of those times, in the springtime, in which, early in the morning, usually you got to wear a jacket or something. But as the day progresses, it warms up, and so you can kind of get out of that. But hope you've had a wonderful day today, and appreciate you stopping by here. And we hope that we can have a good study here tonight. As we always do, we want to give you an invitation. If you're someone who is in the local area, then feel free to come and join us. We'd love to talk with you. We'd love to worship with you. We are located at 307 South Jackson Street in Portia, Arkansas. Right now we are meeting at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, 5 o'clock on Sunday night, and 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. And so, if you're in the area during one of those times, please, feel free to come and see us. We would love to, like I said, love to have fellowship with you. Love to talk with you and get to know you a little bit, to know a brother and sister, in Christ. And so, know you always have that invitation. And also, if you are someone who, if you have any suggestions or questions about future episodes, feel free to send those our way as well. We'd love to hear what you think and what you'd like to hear from the study that we do every Thursday night. And so you have that opportunity as well. And as we have a couple of people here already. You have Mary is here. Hope that you are doing good and appreciate you stopping by. Hope everything is going good over on your way. And also got Jackie Henry as well. Hope that you are doing good. Hope you had a wonderful day. I always appreciate you being here with us. But we were going to be, it's going to probably be a brief episode here tonight because we've got a pretty brief passage to take a look at. As we're going through the judges, as we're going through, these deliverers that were raised up in the chaotic time in Israel's history, in order to save them from oppression. If you remember from your past episodes, or if you're familiar with the book of Judges, you know that Israel is coming out of a time in which they were freed from Egypt. They were freed from slavery in the land of Egypt by a man by the name of Moses. Moses and his brother Aaron were able, by the power of God, were able to take Israel from Egypt, cross to the wilderness, and bring them to the Canaan land. And from there, Joshua, a faithful servant, a faithful leader, took over the helm of leader. And he led Israel into the promised land and got them established. But after Joshua died, Israel kind of descended into a pretty chaotic time in their history where there wasn't really a leader, there wasn't really a king or a judge or anything. And so everyone kind of just did their own thing. And as we see, this had some pretty major repercussions, for them. But it was, like I said, it was a very, very weird time, for them. And so what would happen was, they would get, oppressed, and they would get taken over by another powerful nation, and they would suffer under them for a period of years, and then a deliverer would rise up, a judge. And we've already studied about Ehud. We've already studied about Othniel. Those were two people who stepped up in a time of need and used their skills, used their talents in order to deliver Israel. These weren't exactly, great people a lot of the times. As we'll see later on, the moral character of some of these judges is pretty questionable, but still, they're someone who serve as a pretty good example, for the most part, as far as things to do and things not to do, as well. And so, after the days of Ehud, we know that he was someone. If you remember from last time, he was the individual who used his deception, who used his his craftiness in order to assassinate the king of the Moabites, the king Eglon. and he was able to do that, and he escaped. And then after he assassinated him, he led the Israelite army against the Moabites. And it says that they killed about 10,000 of them and were able to free Israel from their bonds. And so in verse 30 here it says, "And so Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest for 80 years. And so after the exploits of Ehud, the land had rest, for 80 years. And that's a generation of time. If there were any babies that were born, after the victory of Ehud, they would have lived in peace, for most, if all, of their life. And so 80 years is a good amount of time, for peace and for, kind of the independence that Israel loved, to have. But as we know the pattern, as we know the way that everything, loops around here in the book of Judges, that is not something that was going, to last. And so it talks about the next judge you hear coming up, a man by the name of Shamgar. And before we go any farther, we want to say hi to the Dunlaps. Hope you guys are doing good. Always appreciate you guys being here as well. Hope you've had a wonderful day today. But the chapter 3 here in the book of Judges ends with a kind of a one verse statement about the next judge who would raise up for Israel. And we're not given the same amount of details that are given for instance for Othniel or for Ehud, but rather Shamgar, he just gets a very simple verse to describe what he did. Here in verse 31 it says, "And after him came Shamgar, son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he too delivered Israel." The recorder of the book of Judges, one who's recording these events, doesn't feel it necessary to go into the exploits of Shamgar as he does with Ehud, and as he does with Gideon, and as he does with Samson. Once you get to the story of Gideon, there's a lot of information on Gideon. There's a lot of information on Samson. Those are pretty broad, narrative stories. But Shamgar here, he just gets, one verse. And as we'll say, he's mentioned again in the next chapter, in chapter 4, during the Song of Deborah, who's going to be the next judge. She's going to mention his exploits as well. And so those are the only 2 points in which, this man is mentioned. But let's see what he did here. Here in verse 31, it says, "After him came Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he too delivered Israel." And so this man, Shamgar, whose father was Anath, says that he killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. And as you know, if you're familiar, with the history of Israel, and for instance, even going forward in time, to the time of David, who was the big enemy that David faced off at the beginning? Well, it was the Philistines. Israel and the Philistines were arch rivals. They had problems with each other for hundreds and hundreds of years. They would have skirmishes and conflicts and wars, for a very, very long time. And so the Philistines come up against Israel here, in this case, in the days of Shamgar. But Shamgar was someone who stood up to this. And he was someone who helped defend Israel from this incursion, from this, this attack that was coming on. Well, a lot of people believe that since, the writer doesn't go into the same amount of details that he does in the previous, stories, that Israel was more under attack in this case. They didn't really go through in a period of oppression, but rather they were facing an incursion by the Philistines, and Shamgar stepped up in order to be a defender, to be someone who defended Israel from this happening. And he killed 600, which is amazing to think, just fighting a warrior, you're one-on-one, is a tough battle. It can be a tough task. But he defeated 600 people, at one time, and that is something that shows that he was very skillful in what he did. He was very strong, and also he's very courageous as well. I mean, no doubt, this took place over a large period of time, not too large, but it wasn't just one right after the other, but he killed 600 of the Philistines, by himself. And so he, similar to the mighty men of David that are described later on in the days of David, this man was capable of some pretty spectacular things. And so we can see what's possible with God at our side. Last week we talked about some of those recurring themes, those recurring things, that lessons that we can learn from these judges. This is another one of those that pops up in almost every single one of these stories. With God on our side, there's a lot that we can do that we couldn't do otherwise. If you remember what James says, humble yourself before the Lord so that you can be exalted, so that he can lift you up, and so he can prop you up instead of being lifted up by your own power. And so we can have great success, but we need to have the type of success that is defined by God, that comes from him. And we can do some amazing things. We're not called for warfare in our day and age. We're not called for to go into a battle with swords and spears, but instead, as Paul says, we fight that spiritual warfare. We fight that spiritual battle. And you may have to conquer 600 problems in your life. You may have to refuse 600 temptations during your life. You may have to fight those wars and those battles on that spiritual battlefield. And so you too are fighting in a way that Shamgar is, even though he did it in a physical sense, and we're doing it in a spiritual sense, because there is a lot in this world that wants to take you away from the gospel, wants you to take you away from Christ. There's a lot in this world that wants to think of Christianity as something that is useless, something that is outdated, something that is a waste of time, or something to be mocked, or something to be made fun of. There's a lot of people who try to take you away from that at any opportunity. And so we have those spiritual battles to fight, not only from our own world, but also from Satan as well. And so it reminds me of course, Ephesians chapter 6, when we talk about, then Paul goes into that analogy of the weapons of war, and how that armor of God, he talks about the sword of the Spirit, the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the shield of faith, all those things that you need to arm yourself with your character and with your heart, so that you can fight those spiritual battles. And so we can be someone who comes out victorious, and we can follow the example of Shamgar here, and not only be someone who is successful in defending ourselves, but what did Shamgar do in this case? He was not just fighting for himself, but he was fighting on behalf of Israel. And so what does that mean when we conquer our own spiritual battles, when we conquer our own problems that we have in our faith? What does that mean for us? Can we then help other people? Can we then help others who may be going through some of those same things themselves? As the scriptures tell us, to bear one another's burdens, to be someone who helps lighten the load of a fellow brother or sister. Once we have taken care of ourselves, we can be someone that can stretch out our hand and lift up a brother or sister up, and help them along as well. And so we can be someone who follows this example and is ready for that spiritual warfare, and ready to stay true to the gospel, no matter what the cost. Because we know, as you said, a lot of people who will try to convince you otherwise, but the true reward, the you might say the only way to have and to be pleasing to the God of this universe, to the one who created this world, is to live by the gospel. And everything else, it's temporary. It's something that has its usefulness now, but will be forgotten later. We know the reward that God provides is everlasting. It's a crown of life, something that does not, fade. And so we can have confidence, in that. But also here it says, when talking about Shamgar and talking about, how he killed, 600 Philistines, it also says, what he used it with and the weapon that he chose. It says that he used an ox goad in order to deliver Israel. And if you're not familiar with what an ox goad is, it's a really long, we might call it like a pole or a spear of sorts, but it's a really long pole, and it's got a metal tip at the end. And so it's not necessarily like a spear that was meant for warfare, meant for battle, but it was it was a tool that was used for oxen. And so if you were behind them, you could prod them along, and you could goad them along with that pole in order to get them going, get them doing what you wanted them to do. And so instead of using a weapon of warfare, he's using a farming tool in order to fight these battles, but yet he's still able to be victorious and still able to deliver Israel. He could have, as a person who was going out to battle, he could have said, well, I would go out to battle, I would go out and defend Israel, but I don't have a sword, I don't have a spear, so there's nothing I can really do. That could have been the attitude of Shamgar, but instead he took what he had. He had this tool, and he went out and he fought with it. And through the power of God, he was very successful with it. A lot of times, we are very quick, to notice, very quick to bring up the things that we don't have, as a way to discourage us from taking, risks and taking, leaps forward, for the future. You might say, well, if I just had this, or if I just had that, then I would teach a lesson someday, or I would lead a song one day, or I would tell somebody about the gospel. Whenever we get into that trap of saying, if I just had fill in the blank, then a lot of times that day never comes, because we never get to a point where we feel like we have enough. And that's something that I've heard about obeying the gospel before. People sometimes say, well, if I just had everything together, if I just had this, or if I just like I said, fill in the blank, then I would obey the gospel, then I would be baptized. That is a very deceitful, very effective tool that Satan uses in order to keep us from becoming children of God, being someone who serves God in that big way, to keep us focused on the things that we don't have instead of the things that we do, so that we'll never use what we have for the glory of God. Shamgar didn't have anything fancy. He didn't have anything that was big or out there, but it was a simple tool, and he went out and he fought for God. He fought for his people for it, and he was very successful. You know who you are. You know what you can do. The skills that you have, the talents that you have, the resources that you have, the things that you can do. Go out and serve God as who you are, as if with your own situation, because you can do some amazing things, as we see here with what he did. You don't have to wait for some distant point in the future where you will be in a situation to where you can serve God. But you can serve God now. You can serve God today with what you have. Did Shamgar do anything special here? Even though he didn't have a sword, even though he didn't have a spear? Well, yes, he did. And because of his actions, Israel was able to be delivered. They were able to be free. And so that's a lesson for us to remember. Focus on the things that we do have, and not the things that we don't have. Because if we focus on these things that we do have, we can learn to use them for the glory of God, and not be someone who is waiting for a day that will never come, and waste the time that God has given us, when we could be serving him in a big way. because small things can do big things, for God through His power. And that's another lesson we can learn, from a lot of these judges and from Shamgar here in particular. Like I said, he's not even, special enough to get, 2 verses. And here it's just 1 verse mentioning him, but yet see what he does, and through the power of God. And that's something that's, that's pretty special. You don't have to have the biggest, greatest, whatever in order to do, big things for God. But even the smallest things, as he says, if you have the grain of a mustard seed, you can, move a mountain. God can do a lot with a little. And if we're someone who's focused on using what He has given us, like I said, we can do, some big things. And so, as I said, there's not a whole lot here about Shamgar. If we go to the next chapter, to chapter 4, we can see him mentioned again. I believe it's in verse. It's down here during the song, or maybe in chapter 5, I think. Yeah, I actually think it's in chapter 5. We'll go here to chapter 5. Yeah. Yeah, here in verse 6, when Deborah is recounting some of the great things that God has done and how He has delivered them from the from the oppression that they had. As in the mountains quake before the Lord, the one at Sinai before the Lord God of Israel. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, caravans ceased, and travelers kept, to the byways. And so that's the second time in which this man is mentioned, and those are the only 2 times, to my knowledge. And so he was someone who made his mark, during his time. And like I said, we don't remember him, like we do David. We don't remember him like we do Solomon, or Gideon, or Joshua. But he still left his mark, and he still saved Israel, delivered Israel from a time which they could have been, oppressed. They could have been taken advantage of. They could have been, wiped out. And so, just because he doesn't get a whole lot of publicity doesn't mean that he wasn't someone who's a great servant of God. And that's a great example that we can follow. But that'll probably be it for us here tonight. And we will let you go. And then next week, we'll take a look at Deborah and see the only female judge that we have in the book of Judges. We're going to look at her story and how she was someone who also rose up in order to deliver Israel in their time of need, and how she was also a pretty special individual in that regard. But I appreciate everyone being here tonight. Hope hope this was something that was beneficial to you, and hope you've had a good day today. We'll be back here next week, same time, same like I said, same time, same channel, and we'll take a look at another one of these judges. But with that being said, I don't think we have anything else to take a look at, and so we'll let you go, and hope you go out and be the light of the world and glorify God in everything that you do. Catch you next time.